Hello and welcome to the APN podcast. Today, I've got interviews with the candidates for district attorney in the Western Circuit. Deborah Gonzalez is the incumbent. She's a progressive prosecutor from Athens running on the Democratic ticket, and she's being challenged by Kalki Yalamanchili, a defense attorney living in Oconee who runs a private practice. Kalki is running as an independent, but he has a Republican voting record and he's being supported by prominent Republicans in town. However, he was also endorsed by Mayor Kelly Girtz, a left-leaning Democrat. Personally, I don't think we should view this particular race through a partisan lens. But anyway, let's get to it. First, we'll meet both of the candidates, and then District Attorney Deborah Gonzalez will take the first question.
Thanks so much for being here, Deborah.
Oh, thanks for asking me to come on.
Thanks so much for being on the show, Kalki.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I appreciate the opportunity, Chris.
First, I'm wondering how you would describe your first term as district attorney. From the outside, it seems like it's been tough at times. So you've had lawsuits filed against you, the state legislature has targeted you, there's also been a global pandemic. So what's that all been like?
Challenging, I think is the word, and enlightening. There had been a judicial emergency that was set up, which meant that we had no grand juries, we had no jury trials. Basically, they try to keep out anybody who was non-essential courtroom personnel. So things that had to be done in person just were not happening. And that emergency lasted for 18 months. Okay, so you can imagine 18 months when what's coming in is about 40 to 45 new cases every week. And although you can do some things with those cases, on the whole, most of them are not getting resolved. And so when I walked in on that day, there were always over 2,400 cases on backlog, right? So we start off with that backlog. When I was elected in 2020, we also had a major shift. 14 of the 50 DA offices changed leadership. What that did was we had over 440 vacancies of attorneys, of prosecutors throughout the state. Some of those individuals left prosecution, left the public service to take private jobs in the private sector, right? And when COVID was over, they kind of liked the money they were making. They liked that they could be remote because we were one of the first circuits that required everybody to come back to the courthouse. So we were actually starting trials in March of 2021. Now that was really unusual because I can tell you, DeKalb Fulton, they didn't start until a full year after that in 2022. But we were starting early. So there were some people who said, no, you know what? I don't need that. I can make more money, have less stress, not deal with the backlog. So we had that. The other thing that we had was because of the backlog and the closings, we had hiring freezes on all levels. But then as people started getting hired in all the circuits, then we got into, we're not competitive in the marketplace. And when they finally did a market study, I had asked for it for over a year. When they finally did one, they found out that we were anywhere from 10 to 26% less than our surrounding circuits.
As far as salaries.
As far as salaries.
Yeah.
And here is challenger Kalki Yalamanchili.
First, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? So what do you do and how long have you lived in Athens?
Yeah, so my name's Kalki Yalamanchili. I'm an attorney here in Athens. I've had a private practice for the past 6+ years that focuses on litigation, criminal defense, and family law, and other types of litigation, probate and real estate. But criminal defense and family law are my two biggest practice areas. I'm married. My wife, Caitlin, works for the Barrow County District Attorney's Office. So she's an assistant district attorney there. We got 2 little boys. They're 7 years old and 5 years old. We live in the circuit. We live in Oconee County, and they attend Oconee County public schools. I've been back in Athens after law school for 12 years now, a little over 12 years. The vast majority of my legal career. And I've been in Athens in general for 17 of the past 21 years. After I passed the bar exam, my first job was as a prosecutor at the Cobb County Solicitor General's office doing misdemeanor prosecutions. When I got back to Athens, I worked as an assistant district attorney under the previous district attorney, Ken Malden, for about 5.5 years. I was promoted to run one of the 4 Superior Court courtrooms, which meant that I was handling the most serious cases in the courtroom, which would be the murders, crimes against women and children, high-weight drug trafficking cases, domestic violence cases, as well as supervising 2 younger attorneys who were assigned to the courtroom, and I would help them, serve as a mentor for them. After I'd done that for a period of time, I decided that I'd always wanted to be in charge of my own operation, whether that be a full office of people or my own practice. And at the time, I left the office with a great relationship with Ken. I still have a good relationship with Ken. But I also knew, based on the people who were in that kind of next tier of management, that it would be 10, 15 years before, if they stayed in their position, before there would be an opening and opportunity for me to move into a higher level in the office. And so it felt like the right time to go do something new. And so I went into private practice, and that's been great also. One of the things it did is given me more flexibility in my schedule, which has allowed me to reach out into various civic groups and be a part of the community in that way. I'm the current president of the Rotary Club of Athens, which is a civic service organization that has over 180 members here in the Athens area. It may be the largest civic service organization in the area, pretty close. And I'm the president of that organization this year. I've been a member for 5.5 years. I teach a class at UGA's law school the past 3 falls, not this year, just because there's a lot going on. But I get to interact with law students, and the class is on criminal litigation. So we give them a mock case file that is based off a real case. And I always found myself telling those kids when we were in that class that the best job that I ever had was being a prosecutor. It is really unique in the law in that your job is not advocate for the best possible outcome for a client. Your job is to advocate for justice. The service you can offer to a community as a prosecutor and mentoring young prosecutors that want to serve their community is just really profound.
And you've been pretty critical of your opponent, Deborah Gonzalez, and I was just wondering, is there any other reason why you're running now at this time?
Yeah, part of it is a personal thing. Back in 2022, my wife, Caitlin, was diagnosed with breast cancer, and thank God she's cancer-free now. It really kind of put into focus for both of us how there really is a lot of uncertainty in life. We don't know how much time we will get here. We don't know how our health will hold up over time. My real passion is in serving crime victims and making sure that we're protecting the rights of everyone in our community, whether that be the victim of a crime or someone who's been alleged to commit a crime. If that's what I'm telling other students, young attorneys, then what does it mean for me to live that out? And I know this is not just about having to deal with a non-functioning district attorney's office that I think by any objective measure has been a failure under Ms. Gonzalez's leadership. I think from an objective perspective, it's hard to argue otherwise. It is about wanting my kids and my friends and everybody else that I share this community with to have a district attorney's office that is reflective of this community's excellence. I really do believe this is one of the best places in the state of Georgia to live. And we have all the tools we need to have one of the best DA's offices in the state. Not a minimally functioning district attorney's office, but one of the best ones in the state that can be an example of what a good DA's office looks like when it operates under an ethos of doing the right thing the right way, regardless of whether anyone is watching. And I'm excited to be a part of bringing that to this community that I love.
Maybe we should recap for the audience about the district attorney's office, what's happening there now, like why do you call it non-functional, for example?
Yeah, so we've been through several waves of severe dysfunction. Early on, there was just an incredible amount of turnover. And some of that, Ms. Gonzalez said, is people who are leaving the office because there's a new administration in place. And I have no qualms with that. But what we need to realize as a community is over the course of the past 3.5 years, somewhere north of 40 and I think just shy of 50 attorneys have worked in that office. We're talking about an office that has 17 assistant district attorney positions and the elected DA. That's not even just one full round of turnover. That's over 2 full rounds of turnover. Another thing that doesn't get mentioned very often is that in the span of 3.5 years, there have been 3 chief assistant district attorney positions there. That's in the prosecution community regularly considered to be a terminal career position. What I mean by that is that once someone who's a career prosecutor, who's not going to seek elected office, reaches the position of chief assistant, there is nowhere further to go up. And so people that reach that position typically stay in that position. And we've had 3, and my understanding at least is that that position is currently vacant. So I say all that just to say, the amount of churn in that office is not normal, and it's not normal even for someone coming in to start a new administration after having, Ken retired, but defeating the acting district attorney from the previous administration. So that's one.
I'm going to stop you there, Kalki, and we're going to bring in Deborah to respond. Deborah, what are your staffing levels like right now?
Currently, we only have 2 vacancies left.
Okay.
For attorneys. We did a big hire about 3.5 months ago, hired 8 new people. And what we did was we took a look at the work that needed to be done. And how did it need to be done? Did it have to be done always the same way that it had been done before? Did we really need people in the courthouse 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, when we know that if there's a trial, they're staying here till 9, 10 o'clock at night? Did they have to come in at 7 o'clock in the morning as well? If they're coming in on the weekends, did they have to be here on a Friday? And so what we did was we sat down and we looked at, okay, what are all the functions that we have to do as an attorney? What has to be done in the courthouse? Well, appearing before a judge, right? Got to be there. What does not have to be done in front of a judge or in the courthouse? Prepping for a trial, talking to law enforcement, getting things prepared and researched for hearings, writing briefs. There were all of these things that did not have to be done in a courthouse. And so we said, okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to create what's called a hybrid mobile or hybrid remote prosecutor. And we looked at the system in Britain where they have barristers and solicitors. And the barristers are the one that, present in front of the judge. The solicitors are the one that do all the paperwork and the contracts and those kinds of things. They said, and that's what we're going to do here. We're going to have these hybrid remote people. We're going to be able to do all the back stuff and preparing and things like that. And then the ones who are actually going to go into court with the stuff that's ready. And so because of that, because we put that out, we were able to bring in new people. And we brought in people with tons of experience. For example, I've got a new deputy chief, and she has over 25 years of experience as a prosecutor. She's been great helping train some of the younger ADAs. I have a new appellate ADA. She was doing appeals for 7 years over in Metro Atlanta. That's a completely remote position because it's all about research, writing briefs, and she comes in when she has to do an argument in front of a judge. But other than that, she's working remote, and it's working great.
Your opponent's website says that you're currently at about half staff, so that's no longer accurate.
That's no longer accurate.
Okay. All right, so what I'm hearing is that you don't have a problem with recruitment and retention anymore. Is that
No,
correct?
not
Okay.
anymore.
Now back to Kalki so we can hear his second point explaining why he considers Deborah's office to be non-functional.
2 is not just the churn, but the results in the courtroom. The rate at which serious violent felony cases are successfully tried to a jury in this jurisdiction are abysmal. I mean, I'll just take you to their fiscal year 2024 report that they just put out. I mean, they talk about trying 17 trials over a 12-month period. Well, that's low, 1, but 2, they're conviction rate. And, a DA's office isn't measured by overall conviction rates in all cases, but when you're talking about jury trials, these are the cases that you've selected to say dozens of citizens need to take time out of their day to come down, be part of the jury selection process, and then we need to devote court resources, security resources, and our office resources to making sure a jury decides this case. It is that important. And so for in those cases to only be getting a conviction in 53% of the cases is abysmal. I mean, a rate you would expect out of a well-functioning office would be north of 80%. Because what you're talking about in that conviction rate is not even the top number charge, right? It's not that you're getting a conviction on the most serious charge on the indictment. We're talking about a conviction on any of the charged offenses in the indictment. At least that's the way that I interpret that statistic from my understanding of what their trials were and what their results were. I mean, part of the problem is the last time I checked on their public data information portal that's been kind of trumpeted as this great sign of transparency, I don't think it's been updated since the beginning of 2022. And for a while, I took that to mean that they just, because of the dysfunction and all of the turnover, they had stopped tracking the information. But then they started to release all these statistics, and it became very clear to me, no, they're just holding the raw data and releasing statistics that they think will look favorable to them. I mean, that's what it looks like. Because if you don't update that stuff or release it regularly, then while you're tracking it, I don't have another explanation for that. And there may be one. I don't know, but I have not heard it. And it could be that the public information portal in the last couple of weeks got updated for the last 2.5 years. And if it is, then I'm wrong. But it is this hollow promise of transparency that I think is just another mark of a failure of leadership. And then on top of that, and I'm sorry, I'm probably talking too much.
I was just going to say, it has not been updated.
Okay, all right. Yeah. Well, that's good to know. Because I'm very careful. It is very important to me that when I talk about these things that I'm being factually accurate. Because I don't know Ms. Gonzalez on a personal level. We're both at the bar luncheon on Tuesday. We exchanged some pleasantries. I don't know her as a person. I'm not going to attack her as a person. I'm not going to assign to her ill motivations. I'm talking about the things that are really actually happening in that office. It's one thing to say that you're committed to a more equitable justice system. It's a different thing to lead an office that honors the procedural and constitutional rights of defendants, which they have not been doing. And then the last thing off the fiscal year 2024 report that I want to point out, because to me this was quite shocking, and I had prosecutors from various jurisdictions in the state of Georgia reach out to me about this. They seem to be showing, and you can do the math, I'm sure you have a copy of the report, an 1,180 case backlog just in the last 12 months between what they have brought in the door and then what they have closed. They brought in the door somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,600 cases and closed somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,500 cases. That's something like a 70% clearance rate. That is so completely unsustainable, and also 3.5 years into an administration. In an area that's experiencing population growth, maybe you can, for a period of time while work is outstripping resources, sustain like a 5% or something for a year and then get caught back up in the following year. But at that level, I mean, that blew my mind to look at that. Those are some of the things that are going on that I say make it a non-functioning office. And then trial result-wise, out of the last 6 jury trials, they've lost 5 of them. And 50% of those 6 jury trials didn't even get to the jury, did not even get to the jury deliberating on them. 2 of them were what were called directed verdicts, meaning the state failed to present even enough evidence for any reasonable juror to find beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant had committed those crimes. That is a, don't trip on the bar as you step over it kind of level for a prosecutor. You should not be getting directed verdicts in a case that you decided to take to a jury trial. And then the third one was a mistrial where during the first witness of a case and in possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, the state had failed to provide the defense with the defendant's statement, which is a violation of the discovery statute, and then they went to tender in multiple felony convictions against the defendant in front of the jury instead of just the one that was in the indictment, which is obviously prejudicial to the defendant and isn't allowed under the rules of evidence. So Judge Lott had no option but to grant a mistrial. And I don't, Ms. Gonzalez has hired a lot of prosecutors recently, seemingly. But, just hiring people who have bar licenses might be a solution to a political messaging problem about the staffing issue there, but it's not a solution to the actual problem, which is that you need a certain core group of experienced prosecutors who can handle the most serious cases and then train the younger people who are less experienced or who have no experience. Otherwise, you're going to get trial results like this, because the assistant district attorney that caused that mistrial, the person who was sitting with her in the trial, as far as I can tell from the transcript, was someone who had practiced law in Florida but isn't licensed to practice law in Georgia, and apparently did not stop her when she stood up with 2 felony convictions to say, hey, what are you doing? Like, we can't put both of those in. So I don't blame her necessarily for that. I mean, she needs someone, and I was given this when I was a young attorney, which is why it hurts to see younger attorneys being put in a position to fail, because it's a big thing to stand up in a courtroom and try a case to a jury when you're a younger or less experienced attorney. We've got an obligation as a profession when we're putting those newer or younger, less experienced attorneys in front of juries, that we're doing it while giving them the support to succeed and putting people in a place to succeed.
So what I think she would probably say to defend herself would be, she took office in the middle of a pandemic, so she started with this huge backlog of cases because the courts weren't running then. So that put like a huge strain in her office, and it made hiring difficult because, first of all, salaries in her office aren't, she doesn't set the salaries and they're not very high. And so if you might not want to step into something where you'd have like a ton of work and the people who are there are getting slammed, so they might leave. So why are you so sure that there's a problem at the top with Gonzalez, and it's not like the pandemic or the lack of funding?
You talk to people that used to work for her. I mean, frankly, especially younger attorneys, several of them that I've spoken with, some of whom, frankly, have personal relationships with me because we worked together there at the same time, or they, interned in the office when I was at the office. But some of whom I didn't know outside of the fact that they went to go work for Miss Gonzalez, and I didn't work directly with them. But I mean, you see a description of a lot of dysfunction that was kind of led from a lack of experience at the top, not understanding what kind of edicts that are passed out to the office mean in practical terms in a courtroom, not being able to provide good advice to young lawyers when when coming in with particular problems. They felt like they were being left in a situation where they were given a ton of responsibility without very much guidance, and there were going to be serious consequences if they failed, which is, what was happening from a practical sense. And then the other thing, there's no arguing that Ms. Gonzalez started in the last 3 months of courts being shut down for approximately a year, so that caused a backlog of cases. I mean, what I would say is, you look to our west to the Alcovy Judicial Circuit, Walton County and Newton County. They dealt with the same issues. I don't think that they're 100% staffed, but they never went through the type of staffing failures that this circuit went to. You look also to the west of the Piedmont Judicial Circuit, which is Barrow County, Jackson County, and Banks County, and they've remained fully staffed through all of this. And so leadership is incredibly important. People who are going to become prosecutors don't do it to make money. They do it because they have a passion for the work. Now, that's not to say that salary differentials don't make a difference, but during the course of Ms. Gonzalez's administration, she got a significant pay increase for the assistant district attorneys in the circuit who are county paid.
Deborah, your opponent says your conviction rate is abysmal. How do you respond to that? And first, do you have any plans to improve the training your attorneys receive, especially new hires?
Absolutely. We do training constantly. We've got a fundamentals of prosecution coming up. 5 of our new ADAs are going to be taking that class. Unfortunately, they don't offer that class all the time. This is through the Prosecuting Attorneys Council. They offer that once a year in November. So we have done whatever we could to make sure that those 5 new ADAs get to go there, and the other ADAs, including some of the remote hybrids, are going to come in to cover their court so that they're able to do that. We do lunch and learns. We do Friday afternoon late afternoons on Fridays, we'll come together and we'll do a webinar training with PAC. We are constantly doing training and constantly sharing resources. And we have a back and forth conversation between all of the ADAs. We talk about our cases. We ask questions of each other to do that. All of those things have been in place. And now that we have more people, we can do more than ever before.
How would you describe your conviction rate?
I would say right now we're about 50-50, right? But it's getting higher, right? And it's growing. And I think it's just going to continue to grow as these new ADAs get this skill set, beneath their feet, and as they get more and more experience.
Okay.
Now back to Kalki on the topic of victims' rights.
Your opponent's office was recently found to have violated Marsy's law for the 4th time in 2 years. Can you briefly describe what that law is and why it's important?
Yeah, so Marsy's law is actually a constitutional amendment in the state of Georgia. And what it did, in effect, is to incorporate into the Constitution what had previously been known as the Georgia Crime Victims Bill of Rights. And it's a set of minimum rights that crime victims are afforded in the criminal justice process. And so when we talk about minimum rights, we're talking about just timely notice to the fact that a hearing is being held. They have the right to be present in court for any hearings, except those. There are a few types of hearings that by law are closed proceedings. And then they have the right to be heard on any kind of hearing involving release, parole, or sentencing of a criminal defendant. And I'm not hitting every single subsection, but you get the general idea. It's the right to be notified of what's going on, to be consulted with, and essentially be treated with dignity and respect. The reason that's important is crime victims, in the technical sense, are not a party to the crime in the legal technical sense. The two parties to the case are the state of Georgia and the defendant that's been alleged to have committed a crime. So they're not technically a litigant in the case, but I think we all realize as a society that a crime victim has a very important vested interest in the outcome of what happens in the criminal justice system based on a crime having been committed against them. And we owe it to them, at least I believe that we owe it to them as a society, to afford them some basic rights in the progression of the case through the criminal justice system.
Now to Deborah. Deborah, you were recently found by a judge to have violated Marsy's law for the 4th time in 2 years. Are the rights of victims something your office will put a priority on going forward?
It is a priority, and it's a shame about the narrative out there because I think it's really out of context. We have dealt with thousands of cases, over 12,000 cases since I've been in, including those in the backlog. We have dealt with over, I think it was like 12,000 victims. And so we've got 4 issues. And the other thing is I also want to correct a misconception that was out there that we have the only 4 in the whole, 4 out of 5 of the whole nation is in ours. That is false. We actually put out some links as to where there's others. Not one is acceptable, right? We always try to go to where we can do everything perfect for every victim. But we're human and there are thousands of cases. Mistakes happen. Right? And we've been trying to correct them as they go and put in place processes and procedures so that they don't happen again. One of the things, though, is you're talking about 4 out of 12,000 cases as you see that. But also when you have somebody who is so singularly committed and dedicated to highlight every wrong thing that you may do, whether it's true or not, right? And I'll give you a perfect example. When you look at these, and the last hearing that we had, was it really about the victims? Because one of the things I asked him was, this is supposed to be a victim hearing? Not once did we hear from the victim. Not once did the victim come up to say what it was that they were thinking, how they felt about it. All he did was keep talking about things that happened 3.5 years ago and using these victims as pawns in a political scheme because it's election year. And that, to me, is very sad because that is not in the best interests of the victims. The best thing for the victim is that we do the work that we need to do for them. But you want to nitpick on different things and not even let them talk. One thing that I'd like to add about victims and priority, we were the first circuit to actually work with UGA School of Social Work to create a trauma-informed victim lounge, right? We created internships with that school of social work so that our interns in our victim services section have social work experience, because we know about the issues of trauma and we wanted that addressed as much as possible. We now have victim advocates who are nationally certified, and we have a plan in place to get all of them nationally certified through the National Association of Victim Advocates. These are all things that show that we really do prioritize our victims.
So what I'm hearing is that it's sort of exaggerated, some of these claims, but it is 4 violations in 2 years is kind of a lot, isn't that right?
I hear you say, well, 4 is kind of a lot, right? 1 is a lot. But when you look at it in context, 4 to 12,000 is 0.01% of what we do. What's a shame is that that has overshadowed all of the other good work that's being done. And, we'll put out press releases of the good work, that doesn't get picked up. They'll put out a press release of this one issue that happened, that gets picked up, right? And so the message about all the good work that's actually being done by this office is sometimes not heard by people, because the focus is only on the negative, and that negative is being done in a way that's very sensationalized.
Each candidate will get a different question for this next one, and we'll start with Deborah. Deborah, when you took office, you released an important memo on day 1. In the memo, you instructed your staff not to bring charges against someone for the simple possession of cannabis. You also instructed against recommending cash bail for nonviolent offenses. Yet your prosecutors have still been charging people for simple possession of cannabis, and they have still been recommending cash bail. Have you changed your mind about these policies since taking office?
Not at all. First of all, you have to look at every case individually, and we do that. We do the due diligence on every case. Most of the time, simple possession of marijuana is not even charged. One, because our crime lab, the GBI crime lab, won't even test it, right? Because of what's happening with cannabis and all of that. What you see, though, is many times we will have a possession with intent to distribute that has marijuana that then gets reduced to a possession charge. So it's not that it was charged originally as simple possession of marijuana, right? But most of the time, if it's simple possession, it's less than an ounce, we don't go forward with that. The other thing is whether there is actually other charges associated with that particular charge. So a charge that tends to be added a lot is possession of drug-related objects, right? And that's one that a lot of times we will dismiss or not even put into the charges. As for cash bail, what we do is if it's nonviolent and the person doesn't have a criminal history we look for failure to appears. That seems to be what the judges are really concerned about if this person is going to come back. And what I've told my people is, are they a danger to the community? Are they going to reoffend? Is having them out not safe for us? Those are the things that we have to look at. And each person is their own decision, right? As to what that person's circumstances is. We also take into account what the victims feel. So if it's a domestic violence case, for example, if that victim feels that they're afraid, there are certain protections that we can put in, but there are certain things that we cannot. At the end of the day, it is the judge who makes the final decision. And there have been plenty of times where we've agreed with the defense and said, Your Honor, we don't oppose what the offense is asking for. And the judge will say, no, I'm going to deny it. We don't control the judge.
But there are times where prosecutors do argue that the cash bail should not be reduced. Is that correct?
Yes, there are times. Okay. If we feel that the charge itself is so severe and violent, and usually it's either a violent crime or a very serious crime, trafficking for drugs, for example, we will not put a cash bail on that, right? Murder, some aggravated assaults with shooting and knives, some rape situations of sexual assault of children, we will not just accept cash bail.
Okay, so I guess I'm wondering if there's been any meaningful change on either of those two topics since you took office.
I don't think so. In fact, I'm being sued for it. Being sued because I said I wasn't going to prosecute simple possession of marijuana, and I said I wasn't going to prosecute truancy. And those were things that, by the way, my predecessor didn't prosecute either, because the police force was not charging simple possession of marijuana at that time.
Now to Kalki. Would your office ever seek out the death penalty?
Yes, that's a case-by-case determination. I don't think it's appropriate as a district attorney, which is not a legislative position, to say that there are certain provisions of the law that I categorically will never consider, period, because of my own personal beliefs on that issue. In my mind, that is a judicial or executive officer stepping into the role of supplanting their opinion over that of the legislature, which is meant to reflect the collective opinion of all the people in the state, with authorization signing the bill into law from the governor's office. That's my opinion on it. More broadly on the death penalty, I will say that, historically, sure, there have been huge issues with the death penalty. I mean, I think you can see from exoneration cases that we've seen, both in death penalty cases and other ones, that one of the things that happened with the death penalty up until more recent time is over application. Now, today, in the modern sense, when you see a death penalty case, you're talking about a case in which generally guilt or innocence is a undisputed issue. And you're really talking about more of the penalty phase of that case. I don't think that you should categorically rule out the death penalty, and if I saw a case where I thought it was appropriate, our office would seek it.
Okay, but it is very expensive, and I've seen studies that show it doesn't really deter people from committing violent crime, and it can be traumatizing for the people who have to carry it out. But that doesn't change your opinion on it?
Well, it is undoubtedly expensive, especially with the appellate process becoming what it has. As far as traumatizing, the people carrying it out, there's a certain amount of, you take a job, you're required to do certain things that are part of that job. I'm not insensitive to that, but the trauma, I think, is where the focus needs to be on making the decision on whether or not it's appropriate to seek the death penalty is really heavily in consultation with the victim's family. Because you're only talking about homicide cases, obviously. And so, that's a place where you need to have a really honest discussion with people about the fact that if we go this route, even if we are successful at the penalty phase of the trial in having a jury impose a sentence of death, you are going to have an extremely extended appellate process, and it's going to, there are going to be more and more hearings. So you need to talk to people and let them know that. But ultimately, it's a decision that the district attorney needs to make.
So now I want to ask about a hypothetical, but I think it's an important one to a lot of voters. So when your opponent took office, she promised not to prosecute women for getting abortions. And since then, abortion laws have gotten more restrictive around the country with the ending of Roe v. Wade. We've seen women jailed for having miscarriages, and some states are even enacting abortion trafficking laws that prevent adults from helping minors travel to another state to have an abortion. And I'm wondering, if an abortion trafficking law was passed in Georgia, how would your office handle a case like that?
I'm happy to talk about the law as it exists in the state of Georgia and tell you my view on how that operates in effect. It's very difficult to tell you how we would deal with any statute without being given the particular language of the statute. Now, what I'll say, and what I've said before on this issue in public forums and when I've been having private conversations with various voters around the circuit, is obviously we have a law in the state of Georgia. People refer to it as the heartbeat bill or whatever they refer to it as, but it says that abortions after 6 weeks are only allowed under certain set of circumstances that have to do with the life or health of the mother being in serious jeopardy, or when we're talking about cases of incest or rape. There have been 0 arrests in the state of Georgia based on that statute, and I think that the reason that is that the way the statute operates, providers of medical care are refusing to perform any procedures that don't fall within the exceptions of the statute. And this isn't something that me personally or my family in general takes lightly. Before our first son was born, Caitlin suffered a miscarriage. She had to have a DNC as part of that. And before our second son, James, was born, she had an ectopic pregnancy and had to seek medical care for that. So, we recognize how incredibly serious this is. I'm not a doctor. So if a treating physician says that the care that I provided falls within the exceptions of the statute, I don't understand how you could have a prosecutable case just from the legal perspective of things. And the reason I say that is because you would have to go against the opinion of the treating physician. The only way to do that would to bring in a separate medical expert who just at the outset is not the treating physician. They are outside the actual treatment that was given to the patient. One, I'm unaware of physicians who would be willing to do that, but two, and maybe more importantly, we have a jury trial system, and I can't see how you would convince 12 people beyond a reasonable doubt that the person who treated the patient doesn't know as much about that particular patient's medical situation as this outside expert. So my response is, again, I just don't think it's appropriate, even if it's politically expedient, to categorically say as a district attorney there are certain laws that I will not enforce. But I'm not looking to substitute my judgment for a medical provider that was saying that this medical procedure was required and it's covered by an exception under the statute.
Okay, so just to be clear, you are saying it is possible for in the case of these abortion trafficking laws, if that were to happen in Georgia, which is a hypothetical, that...
I have no idea what the law would be or what it would say. I'm not going to rule out categorically enforcing a law that's been passed by the legislature. Obviously, it would have to be constitutional. There are a number of other factors. What I'm saying is I can't form an opinion on what you're asking me without seeing the language of the law.
Back to Deborah. During her 2020 campaign, she promised that she would not prosecute women for getting abortions. Deborah, does that promise extend to abortion trafficking laws as well, if Georgia were to enact one?
Well, it was funny when you first said abortion trafficking, right? Because when I hear trafficking, I think of human trafficking. I think of sexual trafficking and labor trafficking. It's a very negative connotation, right?
It's a weird term.
Somebody who's being forced to do something. And so when I hear that phrase, abortion trafficking, to me, it's sort of like, a dog whistle of very negative, conservative, wanting to look at something and make it something that it's not. Because how I look at it is, somebody who's going to another state to get essential reproductive medical care that they need, that they cannot get where they live. And it is a hardship for many people to have to go and travel, whether it's reproductive medical care or any other medical care. I mean, we are in a state that, over now, what's the number? 8 hospitals have closed in the last 6 years because we didn't expand Medicare. So we're just not talking about just regular reproductive health care. What about just health care in total? Are we going to start saying, you cannot go someplace else, or you have to drive an hour or 2 hours in order to get that essential health care that you need? And we've seen already, the news was filled last week and the week before of 2 Georgia women that we know of who died because of these things, because they couldn't get the essential care, because the providers are scared. They're scared about, are they going to be prosecuted for doing the thing that they were sworn to do, which is to save lives, to help people. So I'm not going to accept the word abortion trafficking, because to me, that is really taking away from the truth of the matter. People need health care, and they should be able to travel wherever they need to go to get it. And the person who's helping them get there, as long as it's not being forced, right? Because again, when I think trafficking, I think about somebody being forced to go someplace and do something that they don't want to do. And we need to change that phrase. We cannot just accept abortion trafficking. That's not what it is, okay? It's about people going to where they need to go to get essential health care. And that should not be illegal to do.
Well, the election's just in a few weeks. Why should voters choose you?
Voters should choose me for the same reason that they elected me 4 years ago. They wanted change. They wanted something different. You know, there's this new website out there called Dangerous Deborah. Yeah, it's gaslighting. But there's some truth to that, isn't it? Dangerous Deborah. What am I dangerous to? I'm dangerous to the status quo. When I was running 4 years ago, I said I was going to change things, and that's exactly what I did. And they didn't like it. They thought the system was going to change me and that I was going to stop, and I was not going to do the reforms and do the work. But you know what? Change is messy. People resist change. Partly because I think people thought, well, if Deborah's trying to make these changes, then what we were doing all our lives, was that wrong? She's saying that what we were doing were wrong. What I'm saying is that the times have changed. What I'm saying is that we have new tools that we didn't have before, and new ways of understanding trauma, of understanding why people do what they do, of understanding what do victims really need in order to heal from these things. We have new knowledge, new tools, new options. We need a new approach to justice. I've never changed that from 4 years ago. So I'm asking those who voted for me 4 years ago, stick with me, because I'm doing exactly what I said I was going to do. Because what is the alternative? To go back to 4, 5, 6, 10 years ago? Because that's what my opponent is offering. The past, right? He's offering to take us back to where we were before. And that's what this community voted against 4 years ago. They didn't want that. They wanted something different. But I think what people forget is that when you're making these kind of systemic changes, 1, it takes time. 2, it's hard, because you're getting all this backlash, all this resistance. And you know what? People don't like to be in the middle of that, right? People don't like to talk about the criminal justice system to begin with. It's negative. It's not an easy thing to talk about. For 48 years, we didn't talk about it because we only had 2 DAs in 48 years. Nobody ever talked about justice unless you were directly impacted. We changed that. We got people talking about justice. We got people talking about a new way of doing things, of holding people accountable, but still having fair and just prosecution in the way that we do it. And it's messy, and it's going to take time. We got a great start. We have a restorative justice program in juvenile for the first time. We partnered and were able to get a second chance desk, partnering with the Georgia Justice Project. You know, my predecessor didn't cooperate in any of those record restrictions. We've been in it since day one, okay? Resentencing. We've been able to do 5 resentencings in the 3.5 years that I've been in office to correct injustices from the past. I have 2 more on my desk right now, working with the Southern Center for Human Rights, working with John Donnelly from the Public Defender's Office on these. My predecessor did 1 in 20 years. And that's even with the challenges that I face in understaffing and all of the negative and everything else that we've been swirling. The reforms have not stopped. The work has not stopped. We come in every day to do this work for the community and to keep in mind the bigger picture. Because we can change it every case that we do, but also in the long run, in the accumulation, we can make that change lasting and sustainable. And that's what we've been doing every day, every morning.
All right, well, thanks for doing this interview with me.
Thank you for wanting to hear me.
My last question is, why should voters choose you?
There are people who have crimes committed against them, and they oftentimes go through the worst thing that they've ever experienced in their lives. Their lives get turned upside down, or they've had a family member that's had a crime committed against them. And because of that, that family member is no longer here or is going through an incredible amount of trauma that they're dealing with. Those people don't get to go around and shop for a lawyer. They don't get to go interview 3 people and decide who they want to handle their divorce. They don't get to go interview 3 people and see who they want to handle their car wreck case. But in a lot of ways, what happened to them is much more serious than those types of civil things that are done. They go to the district attorney's office that has jurisdiction over the area in which the crime against them was committed, and they're given a prosecutor who's assigned to them out of that DA's office. We have a duty to make sure, we have an obligation, a responsibility to make sure that when those people come in the door, their cases are prosecuted by experienced, committed attorneys who know how to get the job done and who can get justice for them in their case in the courtroom. And we don't have that right now. I have spent time in the room with those people, and I've seen the level of pain and the level of need that they have. I'm committed to building a DA's office that has experienced, committed prosecutors who can get that job done. Beyond serious violent felonies, there are so many people who commit nonviolent crimes in our circuit and across the country who are doing it because they have some kind of unaddressed substance abuse or mental health issue. We've had a complete failure, and we haven't talked about it earlier, but we've had a real failure to adequately use the resources that are available to us through our court system called accountability courts to help people address those problems. Accountability courts are very intense processes. You meet with a judge weekly, you have individual counseling, you have group counseling, you have job training, you have a number of different things done that a lot of people going through these types of situations have never been given access to before. And when given access to them, it is statistically proven that it reduces the rate of recidivism, which is the rate at which people reoffend. And we need to be utilizing those courts to connect people with resources, and we're failing there. And then the last thing that I think is incredibly important is making sure that we are serving as a committed partner in the community to help young people who come in contact with the criminal justice system for nonviolent crimes get connected with resources and relationships back within their own community that give them a place to go beyond the peer group that they were in when they got in trouble to begin with. I think those 3 things for me are core to why I believe I should be the next district attorney. I've spent my entire career doing criminal justice work. It's not something I chose as an alternative to other options when they did not work out. It is something I've always been committed to. I interned at a DA's office when I was in law school. I love teaching criminal litigation. I love litigating and being in a courtroom because it is so incredibly important that people's procedural and constitutional rights be protected, and we're seeing a complete failure of that as well. We've had cases in which there have been Brady violations. Brady violation for people out there in the community is when the state has access to exculpatory information, meaning evidence that would tend to prove that a defendant is not guilty, and they withhold that evidence from the defendant. And that is a constitutional violation, and that has been found to happen in Ms. Gonzalez's office. And when it happened, the attorney who committed that violation, who had actually committed that same type of violation previously in a different state while he prosecuted, leading to an individual being incarcerated for, I believe, 14 years for a murder conviction for a crime that person did not commit. was given a job here in our community, and after he did the same thing here again, he was left on the payroll for months and months, collecting one of the highest salaries in the entire office. That's a failure of culture. The culture I want to bring to the district attorney's office is a culture that says we do the right thing the right way, regardless of whether anyone is watching. We advocate for crime victims, and we will get them justice in the courtroom. We care about the people we share this community with, and when they're unhealthy, we want to get them back to being healthy again. And we never want to be in a situation where we're not doing everything we possibly can for young people to make sure we avoid one of the worst conversations you can possibly have as a prosecutor, which is, about putting a kid in a cell, or about a kid who's not around anymore because of crime that's been committed against them by another child or an adult, based on the circumstances of who that child was hanging out with. To me, that's the DA's office this community deserves. It's the DA's office I'm passionate about providing. It's the one that my family deserves, and it's the one that I'm committing to you we can deliver if you go out on November 5th and we make a better decision at the ballot box.
All right, well, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed it, Chris.
I want to thank both candidates for coming on the show. Early voting is starting very soon on Tuesday the 15th. And it's going to be down at the Linden House this time, not the Board of Elections, the Linden House. Starting on the 26th, a bunch of other locations will open up as well, including the Miriam Moore Community Center, the Cooperative Extension Office, the library, the Tennis Center, and later, UGA's Tate Center. Happy voting, everyone.